A wealthy businessman abandons his prized stallion to die in the harsh winter, his heart as cold as the bitter wind that sweeps across his estate. But fate has a way of teaching the cruelest lessons. When illness strikes him down and leaves him helpless, an unlikely hero emerges. A humble farm boy, wise beyond his years, discovers both the dying horse and its fallen master, setting in motion a tale of redemption that will touch your heart. Prepare for a story of compassion, second chances, and the healing power of kindness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first snowflakes of winter danced through the crisp December air at Oakwood Estate, a sprawling property that stretched as far as the eye could see. The grand mansion stood proud against the darkening sky, its windows gleaming like golden eyes in the fading light. Behind the manicured gardens and perfectly trimmed hedges lay the estate's crown jewel, the private stables, where thoroughbreds, worth millions, stamped their hooves against polished wooden floors. Among these magnificent creatures stood Midnight Emperor, a black stallion with a coat that shimmered like polished onyx and a spirit that commanded respect. His powerful frame and proud bearing spoke of his prestigious bloodline, but it was the intelligence in his dark eyes that truly set him apart. For years, he had been the pride of Alexander Sterling's collection, winning championships and drawing admiring gazes wherever he went. Alexander Sterling himself stood at the stable entrance, his expensive Italian leather shoes distinctly out of place among the hay and dirt. His steel-grey hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit immaculate, but his face bore the hard lines of a man who had sacrificed humanity for wealth. Success had been his only companion for decades. His empire, built on cutthroat decisions and unwavering determination. The estate's head groom, James, approached with trepidation, his weathered hands clutching a stack of medical reports. "Mr. Sterling, sir," he began, his voice careful and measured, "about Midnight Emperor's condition." He paused, gathering courage before continuing. "The vet confirms it's a treatable injury. With proper care and rehabilitation, he could make a full recovery." Sterling's cold eyes fixed on the documents, then shifted to the magnificent stallion in his stall. Midnight Emperor gazed back, his dark eyes seeming to pierce through the wealthy man's calculated exterior. The horse's injured leg was clearly visible, a testament to his recent fall during training. Sterling's jaw tightened as he performed. The mental calculations, months of rehabilitation, expensive treatments, no guarantee of future racing victories. "How long until he recovers?" Sterling demanded, his voice sharp as a winter wind. "6 months minimum, sir," James replied. "Maybe longer, but he's young and strong." Sterling cut him off with a wave of his manicured hand. 6 months of feeding and caring for a horse that might never race again? His laugh was hollow, devoid of warmth. "Do you know how much that costs?" James stepped forward, passion overriding his usual caution. "Sir, Midnight Emperor has earned you millions. He deserves a chance to heal. We can't just—" "Can't what?" Sterling's voice dropped dangerously low. "Last time I checked, this is my estate, my horse, my decision." He straightened his Italian silk tie, a gesture that seemed to emphasize the distance between his world and that of the creatures in his care. "Have him transported to the old Miller property by nightfall." The color drained from James's face. The abandoned Miller farm lay miles away, its broken-down barn and frozen fields a far cry from the heated stables of Oakwood Estate. "Sir, please. With this weather, he won't survive a week out there." Sterling turned away, his polished shoes clicking against the stable floor. "Then nature will solve our problem for us, won't it?" His words hung in the air like icicles, sharp and cold. "I want him gone by morning. That's final. As Sterling walked away, Midnight Emperor watched him go. The horse's noble head lowered as if he understood the betrayal unfolding. James stood, rooted to the spot. The medical reports crumpled in his trembling hands as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall outside. Unknown to them all, this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just their lives, but the very heart of Alexander Sterling himself. In the growing darkness, the wind carried the sound of Midnight Emperor's soft nicker, a sound that seemed to ask a simple question. In a world where profit margins matter more than beating hearts, could anyone find the courage to stand up for what's right? The answer lay in the most unexpected of places, with a person Sterling would never have noticed, a humble farm boy named Tommy Carter, whose compassion would soon challenge everything the wealthy man thought he knew about value, worth, and the true meaning of wealth. Far from the opulent grounds of Oakwood Estate on the outskirts of Millbrook Valley lay the modest Carter family farm. The small homestead stood in stark contrast to Sterling's manicured world, its weathered wooden fences and rustic barn telling stories of honest work and simple living. Here, 16-year-old Tommy Carter helped his grandmother tend to their small menagerie of rescue animals, his gentle heart and natural way with creatures making him somewhat of a local legend among neighboring farmers. Dawn painted the winter sky in soft pinks and purples as Tommy made his morning rounds, his breath visible in the crisp air. The old barn creaked a familiar welcome as he pushed open its heavy doors, greeted by the quiet nickering of their 3 rescue horses. Each animal had a story of abandonment or abuse, nursed back to health by Tommy and his grandmother's patient care. Sarah Carter, Tommy's grandmother, watched from the farmhouse porch as her grandson moved from stall to stall, his movements unhurried and purposeful. At 68, she had raised Tommy since he was 5, after his parents' tragic accident. The farm had been their sanctuary, a place where both could heal through the simple act of caring for others. Her weathered hands clutched a steaming mug of coffee as she observed Tommy's morning ritual with quiet pride. "The Miller place has been awfully quiet lately," Tommy called out to his grandmother as he emerged from the barn, his old work boots crunching through the fresh snow. The abandoned property neighboring their farm had stood empty for years, its dilapidated structures a ghostly reminder of better days. Sarah's face creased with concern. "I heard some commotion there last night, truck lights and such." She paused, taking a thoughtful sip of her coffee. "Best stay clear of that place, Tommy. No telling what kind of people might be using it now." But Tommy's attention had already shifted to the horizon, where the old Miller barn stood silhouetted against the morning sky. Something about the property pulled at him, an inexplicable feeling that something wasn't right. He had inherited his grandmother's intuition when it came to animals in distress, a sixth sense that had led them to many of their current rescues. The Carter farm itself was modest but well-maintained, a testament to Tommy and Sarah's dedication. The small vegetable garden, now dormant under winter's blanket, helped supplement their limited income. Tommy's part-time job at the local veterinary clinic provided extra money for animal feed, while Sarah's pension from years of teaching kept the bills paid, if only just barely. Their nearest neighbor, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, the local veterinarian, who had taken Tommy under her wing, often remarked that the Carter's farm had a special energy about it. Animals seemed to know it was a safe haven, and more than once they had discovered abandoned pets at their gate, as if guided there by some invisible force. Tommy finished his morning chores with practiced efficiency, his mind still wandering to the Miller property. Through the winter trees, he could just make out the edge of the old barn's roof, now heavy with snow. The structure had stood empty. Since Old Man Miller passed away 3 years ago, his children too busy with city lives to care about their rural inheritance. "Breakfast is ready," Sarah called from the porch, but her voice carried a note of knowing resignation. She recognized the look in her grandson's eyes, the same one he'd had before finding their latest rescue, a half-starved sheepdog, in the woods last spring. "I just need to check something, Gran," Tommy replied, already pulling on his heavy winter coat. "Won't be long." Sarah watched as her grandson set off toward the Miller property, his tall frame moving purposefully through the deep snow. At 16, Tommy already carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone much older, his young shoulders bearing responsibilities that would overwhelm most adults. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the pristine, white landscape. Tommy's footprints marked a straight line toward the Miller barn, each step bringing him closer to a discovery that would challenge not just his compassion, but his very understanding of justice and redemption. Unknown to him, his simple morning walk was about to intersect with the cruel decision made by Alexander Sterling, setting in motion events that would transform not just one life, but many. Behind him, the Carter farm stood as a beacon of hope. In the winter landscape, its modest buildings and warm lights a testament to the power of kindness over wealth, of compassion over convenience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah watched her grandson's retreating figure until he disappeared into the tree line, her heart both proud and anxious, knowing that whatever he found at the Miller place would surely test the depths of their resources and resolve. The crunch of Tommy's boots through fresh snow echoed in the winter stillness as he approached the abandoned Miller property. Each step brought him closer to the dilapidated barn, its weathered boards groaning under the weight of accumulated snow. The morning light cast long shadows through broken windows, and something about the atmosphere made Tommy's heart beat faster, an instinct honed by years of rescuing animals in distress. As he neared the barn's sagging entrance, a sound caught his attention, faint but unmistakable, the soft, pained nickering of a horse. Tommy froze, listening intently as the sound came again, weaker this time, nearly lost in the whisper of the winter wind. His pulse quickened as he carefully approached the partially open barn door, its rusted hinges protesting as he eased it wider. The interior was dark, shafts of early morning light penetrating through gaps in the roof and walls. The air inside was bitter cold, no warmer than the winter day outside. As Tommy's eyes adjusted to the dim light, his breath caught in his throat. There, in the furthest corner of the barn, stood one of the most magnificent horses he had ever seen, a black stallion of obvious breeding and quality, but in a condition that made Tommy's heart ache. The horse's coat, which must have once gleamed like polished obsidian, was dull and matted. One leg was held carefully off the ground, and even in the weak light Tommy could see the swelling. But it was the animal's eyes that captured him, deep, intelligent eyes that spoke of both pain and a flickering will to live. Despite its obvious distress, the stallion held itself with a dignity that spoke of its noble breeding. "Hey there, big guy," Tommy spoke softly, using the gentle tone that had calmed countless frightened animals before. "What are you doing out here all alone?" He began the careful process of approaching the injured horse, his movements slow and deliberate. The stallion watched him warily, but didn't show signs of fear or aggression, a good sign that spoke of proper handling in its past. As Tommy drew closer, he noticed other details that made his blood boil. The horse wore an expensive leather halter with brass fittings, now frosted with ice. This was no ordinary abandoned animal. This was someone's prized possession, deliberately left here to die. The combination of the horse's obvious value and its current condition spoke of a calculated cruelty that Tommy had trouble comprehending. Carefully, he extended his hand, allowing the stallion to catch his scent. The horse's nostrils flared, testing the air, before stretching its neck forward to touch Tommy's palm with its velvet muzzle. The touch was gentle, almost questioning, and Tommy felt the familiar surge of connection that came with earning an animal's trust. "You're hurt pretty bad, aren't you?" Tommy murmured, carefully running his hands over the horse's body, cataloguing its condition. Besides the obvious leg injury, he could feel ribs under the thick winter coat. Not yet dangerous, but showing that the horse hadn't been here long. The leg injury looked serious, but not catastrophic to his experienced eye. A glint of metal caught his attention, and Tommy gently brushed away frost from a small plate on the halter. The name Midnight Emperor was engraved in flowing script, along with the initials AS. Tommy's mind raced. He had heard of this horse. Everyone in the valley had. This was Alexander Sterling's champion thoroughbred, famous for its victories and astronomical value. The implications hit Tommy like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately abandoned this magnificent animal, leaving it to die in the bitter cold rather than invest in its recovery. The cruelty of the act stood in stark contrast to the horse's noble bearing, and Tommy felt a surge of determination. He wouldn't let this horse become another victim of human callousness. Pulling out his phone, Tommy quickly dialed Dr. Rodriguez's number, his eyes never leaving Midnight Emperor. As the phone rang, he continued his gentle examination, speaking softly to the horse. "Don't worry, big guy. We're going to get you out of here. No one deserves to be thrown away like this." The stallion nickered softly in response, as if understanding the promise in Tommy's words. Outside, the winter wind howled through gaps in the barn walls, but inside, a connection was forming, one that would prove stronger than the cold calculations that had left this magnificent creature to die. Tommy didn't know it yet, but this discovery would test not only his ability to heal broken bodies, but also his capacity to mend broken spirits. As he waited for Dr. Rodriguez to answer, Tommy's mind was already racing with plans. The Carter Farm's resources were limited, but they would find a way. They always did. What he couldn't know was that this rescue would lead him down a path that would intersect with Alexander Sterling's life in ways neither of them could imagine, setting the stage for a lesson in compassion that would change them both forever. Dr. Maria Rodriguez arrived at the old Miller barn within 30 minutes, her weathered veterinary truck cutting through the fresh snow with practiced ease. The sight that greeted her confirmed Tommy's urgent call. This was no ordinary rescue. She recognized Midnight Emperor immediately, having treated many of Sterling's horses over the years, though she'd never been called to Oakwood Estate itself. "Oh my God," she breathed, climbing down from her truck with her medical bag. Her experienced eyes took in the stallion's condition, noting the swollen leg and the frost-covered coat. "Tommy, this is Alexander Sterling's prize racehorse. He won the state championships last spring." She moved closer, her professional demeanor masking her growing anger at the horse's condition. Tommy stood by Midnight Emperor's head, one hand resting reassuringly on the horse's neck. "Someone left him here to die, Dr. Rodriguez. The legs injured, but it's treatable, isn't it?" His voice carried a note of desperate hope. The bond had already formed between boy and horse, evident in the way Midnight Emperor leaned slightly into Tommy's touch. Dr. Rodriguez conducted her examination. With careful precision, her hands gentle but thorough as she assessed the injury. "It's a severe strain, possibly with some ligament damage," she confirmed, "but nothing that can't heal with proper care and time." She straightened up, her face grim. "The real crime is leaving him out here in this weather. Another day or two." And she left the sentence unfinished. "We can take him to our farm," Tommy said without hesitation. "We have the empty stall in the back of the barn, the one we prepared for emergencies." His voice was steady, but Dr. Rodriguez could hear the underlying emotion. She knew the Carters' financial situation, knew how much they struggled to care for their existing rescues. "Tommy, the medical bills alone would be substantial," she warned gently, "and rehabilitation for an injury like this. We're talking months of specialized care." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. This isn't just any rescue. This horse belongs to one of the most powerful men in the valley. But Tommy's expression remained resolute. We can't leave him here. Nobody deserves to be abandoned when they're hurt and scared. His words carried the simple wisdom that had always guided the carter's actions. Please, Dr. Rodriguez, help us save him. The veterinarian looked from the boy to the horse and back again, seeing the same gentle strength in both their eyes. After a moment she nodded. All right, I'll help you transport him, and I'll provide the medical care at cost. But Tommy, this could bring trouble. Sterling isn't known for his understanding nature. Together, they began the careful process of preparing Midnight Emperor for transport. Dr. Rodriguez administered pain medication and anti-inflammatories, while Tommy worked to gain more of the horse's trust. The stallion, despite his injury and ordeal, remained surprisingly cooperative, as if sensing that these humans meant him no harm. Sarah Carter was waiting at their farm when the trailer pulled in, her face a mixture of concern and resignation. She had already prepared the emergency stall, laying down fresh straw and setting out clean water. As they carefully guided Midnight Emperor into his new temporary home, she watched her grandson's interaction with the injured horse with knowing eyes. "Gran, we had to," Tommy said before she could speak. "They left him there to die." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Sarah's expression softened. She had raised him to follow his heart, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. How could she fault him for doing exactly that? "We'll figure it out," she said simply, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "We always do." Her eyes met Dr. Rodriguez's over Tommy's head, sharing a silent understanding of the challenges ahead. The rest of the morning was spent settling Midnight Emperor into his new quarters. Dr. Rodriguez showed Tommy how to wrap the injured leg properly and left detailed instructions for his care. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on him," she promised, packing up her supplies. "Call me if there's any change in his condition." As the veterinarian drove away, Tommy remained in the stall with Midnight Emperor, gently stroking the horse's neck. The stallion's eyes were clearer now, the pain medication taking effect, and he had begun to show interest in the hay Sarah had provided. "You're safe now," Tommy murmured to the horse. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." He didn't know yet about the storm that was brewing at Oakwood Estate, where Alexander Sterling was about to discover that his attempt to dispose of an inconvenient problem had not gone as planned. The wheels of fate were turning, bringing together two worlds that were about to collide in ways that would test the limits of compassion, courage, and redemption. Up at Oakwood Estate, the morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds. As James, the head groom, paced nervously in the stable office, his weathered hands trembled as he dialed Dr. Rodriguez's number for the third time, each unanswered call increasing his anxiety. He had orchestrated Midnight Emperor's transfer to the Miller property with a heavy heart, following Sterling's cruel orders, but had secretly hoped the horse would be discovered quickly. The sound of expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the cobblestone path outside made James's blood run cold. Alexander Sterling appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the morning light. "I trust last night's task was handled appropriately." Sterling's voice carried its usual edge of authority, expecting nothing less than complete compliance. James swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. Midnight Emperor was transported as ordered." The words felt like ashes in his mouth. 20 years of working with horses, and this was the first time he'd been forced to participate in such an act of calculated cruelty. Sterling's thin lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Good. Now we can focus on more profitable ventures. I've already contacted several promising buyers about the new yearlings." He turned to leave, but paused, adding almost casually, "Make sure all traces of Midnight Emperor's medical records are removed from our files. We don't need any unnecessary questions." As Sterling walked away, James sank into his chair, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. He had watched Midnight Emperor grow from a spirited colt into a champion, and now he had helped condemn him to death. The memory of the horse's trusting eyes as they led him into the trailer haunted him. Meanwhile, in his vast office overlooking the estate, Sterling settled behind his mahogany desk, already focused on his next acquisition. The morning light gleamed off the countless trophies and ribbons displayed on the walls, testament to his success in the racing world. Midnight Emperor's victories featured prominently among them, but Sterling viewed them now with cold detachment. A horse was an investment, nothing more, and damaged investments needed to be cut loose. His assistant, Rebecca, entered with the morning's correspondence. "Sir, there's a matter requiring your attention," she began cautiously. "Dr. Rodriguez's office called. They're asking about Midnight Emperor's medical records." Sterling's hand froze over the documents he'd been reviewing. "And what did you tell them?" His voice carried a dangerous undercurrent. "Nothing, sir, as per your standing instructions about confidential matters." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably under his sharp gaze, but they seemed insistent. Sterling's jaw tightened. "Handle it. I don't care how, just make sure there are no loose ends." He turned back to his work, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. But as the door closed behind her, a slight tremor ran through his fingers, the first hint of something that would soon turn his carefully controlled world upside down. In the estate's kitchen, the staff whispered among themselves. News of Midnight Emperor's fate had spread quickly, adding to the growing undercurrent of discontent. Many had worked with the horse, admired his gentle nature despite his champion status. The cook, Mrs. Harrison, wiped angry tears as she prepared Sterling's morning meal. "It's not right," she muttered to the kitchen maid. "That horse gave him everything, made him millions, and this is how he repays loyalty?" She aggressively chopped vegetables, each strike of the knife echoing her frustration. Outside, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, matching the mounting tension within the estate's walls. The stable hands went about their duties with heavy hearts, each passing the now empty stall where Midnight Emperor had once stood proud. The champion's nameplate had already been removed, leaving only a slightly darker rectangle on the worn wood, a silent accusation of betrayal. James made one final attempt to call Dr. Rodriguez, his conscience refusing to let him rest. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. He left a cryptic message, his voice barely above a whisper. "About last night's delivery. There's something you should know. The injury. It wasn't as severe as they made it seem. He could have recovered. Please, help him if you can." As the day progressed, Sterling remained oblivious to the ripples of discord spreading through his estate. In his mind, he had made a sound business decision, nothing more. But fate was already weaving its web, connecting his act of cruelty to consequences he couldn't yet imagine. The first snowflakes of the approaching storm began to fall, carrying with them the winds of change that would soon shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. Through the gathering storm clouds, Alexander Sterling's private jet cut across the darkening sky, returning from a crucial business meeting in the city. Inside the luxurious cabin, Sterling massaged his temples, trying to ignore the persistent headache that had plagued him all day. Something felt off, a weakness in his limbs, a heaviness in his chest that he couldn't quite shake. "Sir, we'll be landing in 10 minutes, his personal assistant Rebecca announced, her voice carrying a note of concern. "Should I have Dr. Mitchell meet us at the estate?" She had noticed the unusual pallor of her employer's face, the slight tremor in his normally steady hands. Sterling waved her off with practiced dismissal. "It's nothing, just fatigue from the meeting." But even as the words left his mouth, he felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The cabin seemed to spin slightly, the edges of his vision blurring. Pride kept him seated upright. maintaining his composed facade despite the growing discomfort. As the jet touched down on his private airstrip, Sterling's condition deteriorated rapidly. The short walk from the plane to his waiting car felt like an endless journey, each step requiring more effort than the last. His driver, Thomas, exchanged worried glances with Rebecca as Sterling practically collapsed into the back seat. "The hospital," Rebecca ordered sharply, but Sterling's weak voice countermanded her. "The estate. I just need rest." His trademark stubbornness remained intact, even as fever began to burn through his body. The car sped through the gathering darkness, snow beginning to fall more heavily now. Back at the Carter farm, Tommy had just finished the evening feeding, paying special attention to Midnight Emperor. The stallion's condition had improved slightly under their care, his eyes brighter, his appetite returning. Dr. Rodriguez's treatment plan was working, though they all knew the road to recovery would be long. "You're doing great, boy," Tommy murmured, checking the horse's bandaged leg with gentle hands. Midnight Emperor nickered softly, nuzzling the boy's shoulder in what had become their nightly ritual. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, built on trust and genuine care. Sarah watched from the barn doorway, her heart both proud and worried. The cost of Midnight Emperor's care was straining their already tight budget, but seeing the transformation in both horse and grandson made it worthwhile. Tommy had always had a gift with animals, but this was different. There was something special about this connection. The ringing of Tommy's phone broke the peaceful moment. Dr. Rodriguez's name flashed on the screen. "Tommy," her voice was urgent, "I just got a call from Oakwood Estate. Sterling's been taken ill, seriously ill." He collapsed shortly after, returning from a business trip. Tommy's hand instinctively went to Midnight Emperor's neck, feeling the strong pulse beneath his fingers. "How serious?" he asked, though something in his gut already told him this was no ordinary coincidence. "They're calling it severe pneumonia, but there's more to it. His body's fighting something aggressive." She paused, then added quietly, "Sometimes the universe has its own way of delivering justice." But Tommy frowned, his inherent compassion rising above any sense of karmic satisfaction. "No one deserves to suffer, Dr. Rodriguez. Not even him." His gaze met Midnight Emperor's intelligent eyes, seeing in them not judgment but understanding. Sarah approached, reading the concern on her grandson's face. "What is it, Tommy?" His response surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "We need to help him, Gran, the same way we're helping Midnight Emperor." "Help Sterling?" Sarah's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "After what he did?" Tommy stroked Midnight Emperor's nose thoughtfully. "Maybe that's exactly why we need to help. Show him there's a better way." The horse nickered softly, as if endorsing the boy's words. The winter wind howled outside, carrying with it the sound of approaching sirens. Up at Oakwood Estate, Alexander. Sterling lay in his massive bed, burning with fever, his empire of wealth and power providing no comfort against the illness ravaging his body. As medical professionals rushed around him, his fevered mind kept returning to one image, Midnight Emperor, standing proud in his stall before Sterling had condemned him to die. In the humble warmth of the Carter barn, Tommy made his decision. "Dr. Rodriguez," he spoke into the phone, "what if we could help both of them heal? Sometimes the best medicine isn't just for the body." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the veterinarian responded. "What did you have in mind?" The storm outside intensified, but within the barn, a plan was taking shape. One that would bridge the gap between two worlds and possibly save not just a man's life, but his soul as well. Tommy didn't know if it would work, but as he looked at Midnight Emperor, standing strong despite his injuries, he knew they had to try. Sometimes the greatest acts of healing come from the most unexpected sources, and the greatest teachers often have 4 legs and a heart full of forgiveness. At Oakwood Estate, the atmosphere was tense as medical staff hurried through the ornate hallways. Alexander Sterling's condition had deteriorated rapidly, the pneumonia tightening its grip on his weakened body. In his fevered state, he drifted between consciousness and delirious dreams, many featuring Midnight Emperor's accusatory gaze. Dr. Mitchell, Sterling's personal physician, emerged from the master bedroom with a grave expression. His fever's dangerously high, and he's not responding to the antibiotics as well as we'd hope. He addressed Rebecca, who hadn't left her post outside Sterling's door. There's something else at play here. His immune system seems to have virtually collapsed. Rebecca clutched her tablet tighter, its surface reflecting the dim light of the hallway. Should we arrange for hospital transfer? The worry in her voice betrayed the usually stoic assistant's concern for her employer, despite his often harsh nature. He's adamantly refusing, Dr. Mitchell sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Even in his current state, he's insisting on remaining at the estate, typical Sterling stubbornness. He glanced at the closed bedroom door. But if his condition doesn't improve by morning, we may have to override his wishes. Meanwhile, Tommy had spent the evening researching on his laptop in the barn, Midnight Emperor's steady presence beside him. Dr. Rodriguez had shared Sterling's symptoms, and something about them nagged at Tommy's memory. He'd seen similar cases during his volunteer work at the clinic, when the body's defenses crumbled under the weight of emotional burden. It's like his body's given up fighting, Tommy explained to his grandmother as she brought him hot chocolate. Just like Midnight Emperor almost did in that cold barn. He gestured to the horse, who was now contentedly munching on hay, his injured leg carefully wrapped. Sometimes the spirit needs to heal before the body can. Sarah settled onto a hay bale beside her grandson, her wise eyes taking in both boy and horse. And you think you can help with that healing? There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity about her grandson's thoughts. Tommy closed his laptop, turning to face her fully. Remember that article Dr. Rodriguez shared about equine therapy? About how spending time with horses can help people recover from trauma and illness? His eyes lit up with purpose. What if that's what Mr. Sterling needs? To see that what he threw away as worthless still has value, still wants to give. Sarah studied her grandson's earnest face, seeing in it the same compassion that had driven them to take in so many abandoned animals over the years. You want to bring Sterling here? To see Midnight Emperor? Not yet, Tommy shook his head. He's too sick to travel. But maybe, he paused, gathering his thoughts, maybe we could bring Midnight Emperor to him, once the horse is strong enough, show him what real healing looks like. Before Sarah could respond, Tommy's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez. Sterling's condition critical. Keeping him stable, but something's missing from his treatment. Your idea might be our best shot. Call me. Tommy quickly dialed the veterinarian's number, putting her on speaker. His vital signs are getting worse, Dr. Rodriguez explained, her voice tight with concern. Dr. Mitchell agrees. There's a psychological component to his illness. The timing of it all, right after what he did to Midnight Emperor. It's like his conscience is literally making him sick. How soon could Midnight Emperor travel? Tommy asked, glancing at the stallion's injured leg. Safely, I mean. Doctor. Rodriguez considered for a moment, the leg's healing well thanks to your care. With proper support and a short journey, he could handle it in about 3 days. But Tommy, are you sure about this? Sterling's not exactly known for his gratitude. This isn't about gratitude, Tommy replied, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. It's about healing, both of them. He walked over to Midnight Emperor, who lowered his noble head to gently bump Tommy's shoulder. Sometimes the ones who act the cruelest are the ones hurting the most. Sarah watched her grandson with pride, remembering all the broken creatures they'd helped heal over the years. But this was different. They weren't just trying to heal a body, but a hardened heart. The stakes were higher, the challenge greater, but somehow she knew if anyone could bridge this gap, it was Tommy. As the night deepened, two scenes played out across the valley. In the opulent master bedroom of Oakwood Estate, Alexander Sterling thrashed in fevered dreams, his empire of wealth powerless against the illness consuming him. And in a humble barn, a boy sat with a healing horse, mapping out a plan to save not just a life, but a soul. The winter storm continued to rage outside, but within the warm barn, hope flickered like a sturdy flame. Midnight Emperor's soft nickering, mixed with the howling wind, a gentle reminder that sometimes the path to redemption comes from the most unexpected sources. The next 3 days passed in a blur of intense preparation and mounting tension. At the Carter farm, Tommy and Dr. Rodriguez worked tirelessly to strengthen Midnight Emperor for the journey ahead. The stallion's injured leg had improved significantly under their devoted care, though they knew the real test would be the emotional challenge of returning to face his former owner. "His vital signs are strong," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed, running her experienced hands along Midnight Emperor's leg after removing the bandages for inspection. "The swelling's almost gone, and he's putting more weight on it." She straightened up, meeting Tommy's anxious gaze. "Physically, he's ready. But are you sure about this, Tommy? Taking him back there?" Tommy scratched behind Midnight Emperor's ears, earning a gentle nicker from the horse. "He's not the same horse who left Oakwood Estate," he said softly. "He's stronger now, not just in body, but in spirit. And I think that's exactly what Mr. Sterling needs to see." Sarah Carter watched from the barn doorway as they prepared the trailer for transport. Her weathered hands twisted her apron nervously, a habit from years of watching her grandson take on challenges that would daunt most adults. "The latest report from the estate isn't good," she shared, having just gotten off the phone with Rebecca. "Sterling's fevers spiked again. He's barely conscious most of the time." Meanwhile, at Oakwood Estate, the atmosphere had grown increasingly somber. Sterling's massive bedroom, with its expensive furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows, had been transformed into a makeshift medical ward. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring his deteriorating condition, while Dr. Mitchell consulted with specialists via video conference. "His body's fighting something deeper than just pneumonia," Dr. Mitchell explained to Rebecca, his voice heavy with concern. "It's like his will to recover is missing without that." He left the implications unspoken, but they hung heavy in the air. James, the head groom, had taken to haunting the hallways outside Sterling's room, his conscience weighing heavily. Finally, gathering his courage, he approached Rebecca. "There's something you should know," he began hesitantly. "About Midnight Emperor." But before he could continue, Dr. Rodriguez's car pulled up the estate's sweeping driveway. The veterinarian strode purposefully into the mansion, her practical boots incongruous against the marble floors. "I need to speak with Dr. Mitchell," she announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's about Mr. Sterling's treatment and a possible breakthrough." In the estate's grand study, Dr. Rodriguez laid out the proposal to Dr. Mitchell. "Rebecca and James. We've been treating his body," she explained, "but not his spirit. Sometimes the path to physical recovery requires emotional healing first." She described Tommy's success with Midnight Emperor's rehabilitation, carefully watching their reactions. James's face lit up with hope, while Rebecca looked skeptical. "You want to bring that horse here, after what Mr. Sterling did?" But Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, intrigued. I've read studies about equine therapy's impact on recovery rates in cases where traditional medicine hits a wall. Back at the Carter farm, Tommy led Midnight Emperor through one final practice walk. The horse moved with growing confidence, his stride almost back to its former grace. "That's it, boy," Tommy encouraged, his voice soft but steady. "Show them what you're made of." Sarah approached with Midnight Emperor's brushed and polished halter, the one bearing his name and Sterling's initials. They had cleaned it carefully, removing all traces of that cruel night in the abandoned barn. "Are you ready for this?" she asked her grandson, seeing the determination in his young face. "We both are," Tommy replied, securing the halter with gentle hands. Midnight Emperor stood perfectly still, his intelligent eyes focused on the boy who had saved him. There was trust there, and something more, a sense of purpose that seemed to transcend mere animal instinct. Dr. Rodriguez's return call confirmed. The plan was approved. They would transport Midnight Emperor to Oakwood Estate the next morning, timing their arrival with what the doctors predicted would be a brief window of lucidity in Sterling's fever cycle. As evening fell, Tommy spent extra time with Midnight Emperor, talking softly to him about what lay ahead. The horse listened with pricked ears, occasionally nickering softly as if in response. In the growing darkness, Tommy could have sworn he saw understanding in those deep brown eyes, as if the horse knew their journey of healing was about to come full circle. "Tomorrow we show him what real strength looks like," Tommy whispered, pressing his forehead against Midnight Emperor's strong neck. "Not the kind that comes from power or money, but the kind that comes from forgiveness." The night settled over both properties, the humble Carter farm and the grand Oakwood Estate, as two very different worlds prepared to collide. In his fevered state, Sterling muttered restlessly about horses and snow, while in a warm barn miles away, a boy and a horse rested peacefully, ready for whatever challenges the morning would bring. Dawn broke over Oakwood Estate with an ethereal glow, the fresh snow casting a pristine blanket over the manicured grounds. Tommy stood in the trailer with Midnight Emperor, making final adjustments to the protective wraps on his legs. The horse remained calm, drawing strength from the boy's steady presence, despite the familiar surroundings that had once been the site of his betrayal. Dr. Rodriguez's truck pulled up to the estate's impressive front entrance, where Rebecca and Dr. Mitchell waited anxiously. The contrast was striking, the humble horse trailer behind the vet's weathered truck parked in front of the mansion's grand facade. James emerged from the stables, his face a mix of guilt and hope as he recognized Midnight Emperor's proud profile through the trailer windows. "Mr. Sterling's fever broke slightly about an hour ago," Dr. Mitchell informed them as Tommy carefully led Midnight Emperor down the trailer ramp. "He's more lucid than he's been in days, but we don't know how long this window will last." The doctor's eyes widened as he took in the horse's transformed condition. "Remarkable. He looks healed," James finished, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just the leg, but his spirit." The head groom approached cautiously, and Midnight Emperor acknowledged him with a gentle nickering, showing no signs of resentment for James's part in his abandonment. Tommy guided the stallion with quiet confidence through the estate's halls, their footsteps echoing against marble floors. The horse moved carefully but steadily, his injured leg supporting him well after weeks of patient rehabilitation. Staff members stopped and stared as the unlikely pair passed. The humble farm boy and the magnificent thoroughbred, both seemingly out of place in the mansion's opulent interior. Outside Sterling's bedroom, Rebecca hesitated. "He's very weak," she warned, "and he might not react well to seeing the horse." Her protective instinct toward her employer was evident in her voice. "Trust me," Tommy replied softly, one hand resting on Midnight Emperor's neck. "Sometimes the hardest meetings are the most necessary ones." The wisdom in his young voice gave them all pause. Inside the bedroom, Alexander Sterling lay propped against a mountain of pillows, his once commanding presence diminished by illness. His steel-grey hair lay damp against his forehead, his expensive silk pajamas wrinkled from restless sleep. The morning light streaming through the vast windows caught the sheen of fever still bright in his eyes. The door opened wider, and Sterling's fevered gaze focused on the impossible sight before him, Midnight Emperor standing proud and strong, with a young boy at his side. For a moment, the businessman's mask cracked, revealing raw emotion underneath. "Impossible," Sterling whispered, his voice hoarse. I left you to—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the weight of his actions seemingly crushing him anew. Tommy stepped forward, still leading Midnight Emperor. "He survived," the boy said simply, "because he had something to live for. And so do you, Mr. Sterling, if you'll let yourself see it." The horse moved closer to the bed, his steps measured and deliberate. There was no fear in his bearing, no sign of the trauma he had endured. Instead, he lowered his noble head toward his former owner, his eyes holding not accusation, but something that looked remarkably like forgiveness. Sterling's hand trembled as he lifted it, hesitating just inches from Midnight Emperor's velvet nose. The stallion closed the distance himself, pressing his muzzle gently against Sterling's palm. The touch seemed to break something in the wealthy man's carefully constructed walls. "I'm sorry," Sterling breathed, the words catching in his throat. "I'm so sorry." Tears, perhaps the first he'd shed in years, traced down his hollow cheeks. Tommy watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction, noting how Midnight Emperor remained gentle and patient, offering the very things Sterling had denied him: compassion. "He's teaching us both," Tommy said softly, "about strength and healing and second chances." The morning light strengthened, illuminating the scene, the mighty businessman humbled in his sickbed, the magnificent horse offering silent forgiveness, and the young boy who had bridged their worlds with simple, unfailing kindness. The machines monitoring Sterling's vitals began to show subtle changes. His heart rate steadied, his oxygen levels improved slightly. Dr. Mitchell observed the readings with growing interest, while Dr. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. Sometimes the best medicine couldn't be found in any pharmacy. Rebecca dabbed at her eyes, while James watched from the doorway, his own journey of redemption reflected in the scene before him. Would you bring him again?" Sterling asked, his voice stronger than it had been in days. The question held more than just a request for the horse's presence. It was an acknowledgement of need, of connection, of the possibility, of change. Tommy smiled, his hand steady on Midnight Emperor's neck. "Every day, if you'd like. There's a lot he can teach us, if we're willing to learn." The horse nickered softly, as if affirming the boy's words, and for the first time in weeks, Alexander Sterling smiled, a real smile untouched by power or pride. Over the next few weeks, a remarkable transformation took place at Oakwood Estate. Each morning, Tommy would arrive with Midnight Emperor, the unlikely pair becoming a familiar sight on the mansion's grounds. Sterling's recovery, though slow, showed steady progress that seemed to mirror the deepening bond forming between man, horse, and boy. Dr. Mitchell noted the marked improvement in Sterling's vital signs during and after each visit. "His immune system is finally responding to the treatments," he shared with Dr. Rodriguez during one of their daily consultations. "Whatever magic that boy and horse are working, it's doing what medicine alone couldn't." Sterling had been moved to a ground-floor suite with French doors opening onto the garden, allowing Midnight Emperor easier access. The room, once a stark display of wealth and status, gradually transformed. Photos of the horse's recovery at the Carter farm, shared by Tommy, now stood among the business awards and racing trophies. "Tell me again," Sterling would ask, his voice growing stronger each day, "about how you found him." He listened intently as Tommy described that snowy morning at the Miller barn, the horse's condition, and the unwavering faith that guided his recovery. Each telling seemed to chip away at the walls Sterling had built around his heart. During one particularly meaningful session, Sterling watched as Tommy demonstrated the gentle exercises that had helped strengthen Midnight Emperor's injured leg. "You never gave up on him," Sterling observed, his voice thick with emotion, "even when it would have been easier to walk away." "That's not how healing works," Tommy replied, his young face serious. "Whether it's a horse or a person, sometimes the ones who push everyone away are the ones who need help the most." The wisdom in his words made Sterling fall silent, contemplating his own lifetime of pushing people away in pursuit of success. Rebecca noticed other changes in her employer. The sharp edge that had characterized his business dealings began to soften. She found him one morning poring over the estate's financial records, but instead of analyzing profits, he was calculating the cost of upgrading the stable facilities. "I want to create a rehabilitation center," Sterling announced during one of Tommy's visits, "here at Oakwood, for injured horses that others have given up on." His eyes met Tommy's with newfound purpose. Would you help me plan it?" Tommy's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "You mean like Spirit Haven Ranch, but with more resources?" He immediately began sharing ideas, drawing from his experiences at his grandmother's farm. Sterling listened intently, taking notes with the same focus he once reserved for business deals. James, the head groom, found his own redemption in these developments. The guilt that had weighed him down since that fateful night began to lift as he threw himself into planning the rehabilitation center. His years of experience with horses, combined with Tommy's natural gift for healing, proved an invaluable combination. Sarah Carter visited the estate one afternoon, bringing her famous honeyed oat cookies, a treat both Sterling and Midnight Emperor had developed a fondness for. She watched with quiet satisfaction as her grandson guided both horse and man through their daily routine. "You've done more than save a life here, Tommy," she told him on their drive home that evening. "You've helped save a soul." Tommy glanced back at the estate through the rear-view mirror, thinking about the changes he'd witnessed. "Sometimes people just need to be reminded of their own capacity for kindness," he replied. The transformation wasn't limited to Sterling's emotional state. His physical recovery accelerated as he began taking short walks in the garden with Tommy and Midnight Emperor. The horse would match his pace perfectly, offering stable support when needed, demonstrating the same patience that had been shown to him during his own recovery. Dr. Rodriguez observed these sessions with professional interest but personal joy. "It's called mutual rehabilitation," she explained to Dr. Mitchell. "The horse and human heal each other. I've seen it before, but never quite like this." As spring began to hint at its arrival, melting the last remnants of winter snow, Sterling made an unexpected announcement. He called a meeting with his board of directors, Tommy and Sarah Carter, and both doctors present. "Effective immediately," he declared, his voice strong and clear. "I'm restructuring Oakwood Estate's priorities. The racing stable will remain, but our primary focus will be the rehabilitation center." He glanced at Tommy, who sat between his grandmother and Midnight Emperor. "With the right guidance, we can help a lot of horses and people." The board members exchanged concerned looks, but Sterling continued with newfound conviction. "I've already allocated the funds. The facilities will be state-of-the-art, but the heart of this program will be the same principles I learned from a boy who saw value in what I had thrown away." Tommy felt Midnight Emperor's reassuring presence beside him as Sterling outlined his vision for the future. The horse's coat gleamed with health, his injury healed, but the lessons of his journey permanently embedded in the lives he had touched. Sometimes, Tommy realized, the greatest victories aren't won on racetracks, but in the quiet moments of transformation when hearts open to the possibility of change. Spring fully blossomed at Oakwood Estate, transforming the grounds into a canvas of vibrant colors. The rehabilitation center's construction was well underway, with new stable blocks rising alongside state-of-the-art therapy facilities. Sterling, now fully recovered, spent his mornings overseeing the progress, his afternoons learning from Tommy about the subtleties of horse rehabilitation. "The key is patience," Tommy explained one afternoon as they worked with a newly arrived rescue horse. "Every animal heals at its own pace, just like people do." Sterling nodded, remembering his own journey back to health. Midnight Emperor grazed peacefully nearby, his presence a constant reminder of how far they had all come. The changes at Oakwood Estate had attracted attention from the equestrian community. Dr. Rodriguez found herself fielding calls from veterinary colleges interested in establishing internship programs, while James coordinated with rescue organizations across the state. The estate that had once been known for its racing victories was gaining a new reputation as a place of healing and hope. Sterling had insisted that Tommy be officially named as the center's head of rehabilitation programs, despite his young age. "Age doesn't determine wisdom," Sterling had declared when some board members raised concerns. "Results do." He then pointed to Midnight Emperor, whose remarkable recovery story had already inspired many. Sarah Carter watched these developments with quiet pride, though she worried about her grandson balancing his new responsibilities with his schoolwork. But Tommy seemed to thrive on the challenges, his natural gift for healing growing stronger with each new case they took on. "We're creating something special here, Gran," Tommy shared one evening as they watched the sunset from their farmhouse porch. "It's like every horse we help is carrying forward Midnight Emperor's story." Sarah smiled, remembering the snowy morning that had started it all. The rehabilitation center's approach was unique, combining traditional veterinary care with the compassionate methodology Tommy had developed. Sterling made sure every detail supported their mission, from the specially designed recovery stalls to the peaceful therapy paddocks. "I want to show you something," Sterling said to Tommy one morning, leading him to his office. The walls, once dominated by racing trophies, now featured photos of their success stories, horses that had arrived broken and left whole. At the center was a large photograph of Midnight Emperor standing proud in the spring sunshine, his dark coat gleaming with health. "This reminds me every day of what really matters," Sterling explained, his voice soft with emotion. "Not the victories on the track, but the victories of the spirit." Tommy noticed that Sterling's desk now faced the window overlooking the rehabilitation paddocks rather than the business district in the distance. The transformation extended beyond the physical facilities. Sterling had established a foundation to cover treatment costs for owners who couldn't afford specialized care for their horses. No one should have to choose between healing their horse and feeding their family, he declared during the foundation's launch. Midnight Emperor remained the heart of the program, seeming to sense when new arrivals needed encouragement. He would often stand at the fence line of the recovery paddocks, his gentle presence calming nervous or injured horses. "He remembers what it was like," Tommy observed. "He's showing them they're not alone." Dr. Rodriguez had expanded her practice to be permanently based at the center, training a new generation of veterinarians in both medical care and compassionate healing. "What we're doing here goes beyond traditional veterinary medicine," she explained to her students. "We're healing bodies and spirits together." James, too, had found his calling as the center's operations manager, his years of experience now devoted to ensuring every horse received the same level of care that had saved Midnight Emperor. The guilt of his past actions had transformed into a fierce dedication to their mission. 1 year to the day after Midnight Emperor's rescue, Sterling organized a special celebration at the estate. The event wasn't the formal gala his old self might have planned, but rather a warm gathering of all those who had contributed to the centre's success. Under the spring sky, Sterling stood before the assembled crowd, staff members, volunteers, veterinary students, and grateful horse owners. Midnight Emperor stood beside him, with Tommy at his head, embodying the journey they had all taken together. "A year ago, I thought I knew the value of things," Sterling began, his voice carrying across the attentive audience. "I measured everything in dollars and cents, in wins and losses. It took a brave young boy and a horse I had discarded to show me what true value means." He gestured to the rehabilitation center behind him, its new buildings gleaming in the sunlight. "This place isn't just about healing horses. It's about healing hearts, rebuilding trust, and believing in second chances. Every time we save a horse, we're really saving a piece of ourselves." The gathering erupted in applause, but Tommy's attention was on Midnight Emperor, who stood proud and strong, his eyes bright with intelligence and peace. The horse that had once been abandoned in a cold barn had become a symbol of hope, his story touching countless lives and continuing to inspire new beginnings. As news of Oakwood Estate's transformation spread, visitors began arriving from across the country. Among them was Jason Chen, a prominent documentary filmmaker known for his compelling stories about social change. He had heard about the unlikely partnership between a wealthy businessman, a humble farm boy, and a rescued horse, seeing in it a narrative that could inspire others. "There's something magical happening here," Chen observed, watching Tommy work with a newly arrived rescue horse, while Midnight Emperor observed from nearby. "The way you've merged high-end facilities with down-to-earth compassion, it's unique." Sterling, walking beside the filmmaker, nodded thoughtfully. "The magic isn't in the facilities," Sterling replied, gesturing toward Tommy and Midnight Emperor. "It's in the understanding that every life has value, something I had forgotten until they taught me." His words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, a complete departure from his former calculating demeanor. The documentary project quickly took shape, with Chen's cameras capturing the daily rhythms of life at the rehabilitation center. They filmed Tommy's gentle work with injured horses, Sterling's hands-on involvement in their care, and Midnight Emperor's continued role as the heart of the program. Sarah Carter, interviewed for the documentary, shared her perspective on the transformation she'd witnessed. "It wasn't just about saving a horse," she explained, her eyes misting with emotion. "It was about saving each other. Tommy gave that horse a chance to heal, and in return, Midnight Emperor showed us all what courage really looks like." Dr. Rodriguez contributed her professional insights, explaining how the center's approach had revolutionized equine rehabilitation. "We're seeing recovery rates that would have seemed impossible a year ago," she reported, reviewing their case files. "But more than that, we're seeing healing that goes beyond the physical, in both horses and humans." The cameras captured particularly poignant moments. Sterling sitting in the quiet of dawn with Midnight Emperor, sharing confidences with the horse who had changed his life. Tommy teaching young volunteers his gentle methods of building trust with traumatized animals. James leading orientation sessions for new staff members, emphasizing the importance of patience and compassion. During one filming session, a dramatic situation arose that demonstrated the true impact of their work. A severely injured horse arrived in the middle of the night, victim of a terrible accident. The entire team mobilized instantly, their coordinated response demonstrating how far they had come as a unified force for healing. Sterling, without hesitation, authorized whatever resources were needed for treatment. Tommy worked alongside Dr. Rodriguez through the night, his calm presence helping to keep the frightened animals stable. Midnight Emperor stood watch from a nearby paddock, his steady presence seemingly lending strength to everyone involved. "This is what it's all about," Chen remarked as he filmed the team's tireless efforts. not just saving lives, but showing how compassion can transform an entire community. His camera captured the sunrise breaking over the scene, illuminating exhausted but triumphant faces as the crisis passed. The documentary also explored the ripple effects of Oakwood's transformation. Other wealthy stable owners had begun to reach out, inspired by Sterling's example. Some offered financial support for the foundation, while others sought advice on starting similar programs at their own facilities. "We're creating a network of healing," Sterling explained during one of his interviews. "Every success story here becomes a seed for change somewhere else." His eyes frequently turned to Midnight Emperor during these conversations, as if drawing strength from the horse's unwavering presence. Tommy's role had evolved as well. Despite his youth, he had become a respected teacher, sharing his insights with veterinary students and experienced handlers alike. "Age doesn't matter," he would tell them, "when you're speaking from the heart. The horses know the difference between true compassion and just going through the motions." Chen's cameras captured this wisdom in action, following Tommy as he worked with a particularly challenging case, a horse so traumatized it had refused human contact for months. With infinite patience and Midnight Emperor's calming presence nearby, Tommy gradually broke through the animal's defenses. "Watch their eyes," he explained to a group of observers. "They'll tell you everything you need to know about what they're feeling, what they need." His gentle approach, born from that first snowy morning with Midnight Emperor, had become a template for healing that transcended traditional methods. The documentary crew spent several months at Oakwood, witnessing the changing seasons and the ongoing evolution of the rehabilitation center. They filmed the completion of new facilities, the graduation of their first class of intern veterinarians, and countless moments of quiet triumph as injured horses found their way back to health and trust. Throughout it all, Midnight Emperor remained a constant presence, his own story of recovery and forgiveness touching everyone who visited the estate. He had become more than just a symbol of the center's mission. He was a living testament to the power of second chances and the healing capacity of unconditional love. As the documentary neared completion, its impact began reaching far beyond Oakwood's gates. Private screenings of rough cuts drew emotional responses from viewers, with many reaching out to offer support for the rehabilitation center. Sterling found himself fielding calls from business leaders who once knew him only as a ruthless competitor, now eager to learn about his transformation. One particularly memorable moment came when the governor's office contacted Oakwood Estate, expressing interest in establishing similar programs throughout the state. Sterling and Tommy found themselves presenting their model to a panel of agricultural and veterinary experts, with Midnight Emperor's story serving as the cornerstone of their presentation. "It's not just about having the right facilities," Tommy explained to the assembled officials, his young voice steady and confident. "It's about creating an environment where both animals and people can rediscover their worth." Sterling watched with pride as his young partner fielded complex questions with wisdom that belied his years. The impact of their work manifested in unexpected ways. Local schools began organizing field trips to the rehabilitation center, where Tommy would lead educational programs about animal care and compassion. Children who had never interacted with horses found themselves transformed by the experience, much as Sterling had been. "Watch how they respond to Midnight Emperor," Sarah remarked to Dr. Rodriguez during one such visit. The majestic black stallion stood patiently as small hands reached out to touch his velvet nose, his gentle demeanor a far cry from the traumatized horse they had rescued from the Miller barn. The documentary crew captured a particularly moving scene when a group of at-risk youth visited the center. These teenagers, many from troubled backgrounds, found something healing in the presence of the recovering horses. Sterling, Watching them work with Tommy and Midnight Emperor saw reflections of his own journey from hardness to compassion. Sometimes the ones who act the toughest are carrying the deepest wounds, Tommy observed quietly, standing beside Sterling. As they watched one particularly guarded teen begin to open up while grooming a rescued horse. These kids understand what it's like to need a second chance. The rehabilitation center's success stories continued to multiply. Horses that other facilities had given up on found new life under their care. The combination of Tommy's intuitive understanding, Sterling's resources, and the entire team's dedication produced results that caught the attention of the veterinary community worldwide. Dr. Rodriguez began publishing papers about their innovative approaches, with Tommy contributing insights that challenged traditional rehabilitation methods. Their work was revolutionizing the field, proving that healing required more than just medical intervention. It needed heart. One afternoon, as golden sunlight bathed the estate grounds, Jason Chen filmed what would become one of the documentary's most powerful sequences. Sterling and Tommy stood with Midnight Emperor in the same paddock where the horse had once trained for races, but now the space served a different purpose. Everything looks different now, Sterling reflected, his hand resting on Midnight Emperor's neck. I used to see this place only in terms of victories and defeats. Now I understand that the real victories aren't won on racetracks. They're won in moments of healing, of connection, of choosing compassion over convenience. The cameras captured Tommy nodding in agreement, his bond with both horse and man, evident in the comfortable silence they shared. Midnight Emperor, his coat gleaming in the afternoon light, stood as a living bridge between their once separate worlds, a symbol of transformation that continued to inspire everyone who encountered their story. The episode with the at-risk youth program led to another expansion of Oakwood's mission. Sterling established a foundation specifically focused on combining equine therapy with youth outreach, creating opportunities for troubled teenagers to find healing through working with the horses. Every life has value, Sterling explained during a board meeting to approve the new initiative. Whether it's a horse others have given up on or a kid who's lost their way, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past the surface. His words echoed the lesson Tommy had taught him during his own darkness. As summer approached, the rehabilitation center prepared for its first anniversary celebration. The documentary was scheduled to premiere at the event, bringing together all the threads of their remarkable journey. Invitations went out to supporters, volunteers, and most importantly, to the families whose lives had been touched by their work. The estate's transformation was complete. Racing trophies still held their places of honor, but now they shared space with photos of recovered horses, letters of gratitude from families, and artwork created by the young people who had found healing there. Each piece told a story of transformation, of second chances seized and lives renewed. Through it all, Midnight Emperor remained the heart of their mission, his own journey from abandonment to healing continuing to inspire new beginnings. The horse that Sterling had once discarded as worthless had become priceless, not for his racing potential, but for his role in a miracle of transformation that touched countless lives. The day of the documentary premiere and anniversary celebration dawned bright and clear at Oakwood Estate. The grounds had been transformed, with white tents dotting the rolling lawns and the rehabilitation center's new facilities gleaming in the morning sun. Banners celebrating a year of second chances fluttered in the gentle breeze as staff and volunteers made final preparations. Tommy arrived early, making his usual rounds with Midnight Emperor before the guests would arrive. The stallion seemed to sense the significance of the day, carrying himself with extra pride as they walked the familiar paths. Together, they visited each of the current rehabilitation cases, checking on their progress and offering encouragement. "You started all this, boy," Tommy murmured to Midnight Emperor as they paused to watch the sunrise. One snowy morning changed everything. The horse nickered softly in response, gently bumping Tommy's shoulder with his nose, a gesture that had become their private form of communication. Sterling joined them, looking relaxed in casual attire, another marked change from his former self. "I had a thought," he announced, his eyes bright with purpose. "After the documentary screening, I want to make an announcement. Something big." He shared his idea with Tommy, whose face lit up with enthusiasm. Throughout the morning, guests began arriving. Veterinarians, volunteers, donors and families whose horses had found healing at Oakwood. Each had a story to tell, a connection to the miracle that had unfolded over the past year. The documentary crew captured these reunions, adding final touches to their story of transformation. Sarah Carter watched it all from the shade of an old oak tree, remembering the morning Tommy had first asked to help an abandoned horse. "Did you know?" asked Dr. Rodriguez, joining her. "Did you know that day would change so many lives?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandson's unwavering compassion. "Tommy's always seen the best in others. He just needed the right moment to show everyone else how to see it too." The screening was set up in the indoor arena, transformed for the occasion with comfortable seating and a massive screen. As guests took their places, Midnight Emperor was led to a special area near the front, his presence a living testament to the story they were about to witness. The documentary began with those fateful moments in the Miller barn, recreated through careful reenactment and enhanced by actual photographs. The audience watched in rapt attention as the story unfolded. The rescue, Sterling's illness, Tommy's persistent compassion, and the remarkable healing that followed. Many were moved to tears, seeing the parallel journeys of recovery, Sterling's return from the brink of death mirroring Midnight Emperor's rehabilitation. The footage captured intimate moments of transformation. Sterling's first genuine smile. In years, Tommy's patient work with traumatized horses, the gradual building of trust between man, boy, and horse. As the film progressed, it expanded to show the ripple effects of their story. The establishment of the rehabilitation center, the youth programs, the lives touched and changed. The camera work was masterful, capturing both the grandeur of Oakwood Estate and the intimate moments of connection that defined their work. When the lights came up, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Sterling took the stage, his presence now carrying a different kind of authority, not the power of wealth, but the strength of transformation. "What you've just witnessed," he began, "is only the beginning. Today, I'm announcing the establishment of the Midnight Emperor Foundation." He went on to explain his vision, a network of rehabilitation centers across the country, each following the model they'd developed at Oakwood. "Every community deserves a place where healing can happen," he declared, "where second chances are given, where value isn't measured in dollars, but in the capacity for recovery and growth." Tommy joined him on stage, leading Midnight Emperor, who stood proud and calm despite the crowd. "This horse taught us that no life is beyond saving," Tommy added, his young voice carrying the weight of earned wisdom. "And every person has the capacity to change, to choose compassion over convenience, understanding over judgment." The announcement was met with thunderous applause, but the most powerful moment came when Sterling knelt beside a group of children from their youth program. "These kids," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and these horses, they're teaching us more than we could ever teach them. They're showing us what courage really looks like." As the formal presentation concluded, guests spread out across the estate grounds, sharing stories and celebrating the vision of the future. The documentary crew captured these moments too, the natural interaction of people from all walks of life, united by their connection to this place of healing. Midnight Emperor spent the afternoon greeting visitors, his gentle demeanor a stark contrast to the frightened, injured horse they had rescued a year ago. Children were drawn to him, and he seemed to take special care with the more timid ones, lowering his proud head to their level, offering the same patience that had been shown to him. The success of the documentary and the announcement of the Midnight Emperor Foundation sparked a wave of change that rippled far beyond Oakwood Estate. Within months, preparations began for the first satellite rehabilitation center in a neighboring state, with Tommy deeply involved in designing the facility and training its staff in their unique approach to healing. Sterling threw himself into the expansion with the same intensity he had once devoted to making money, but now his drive was fueled by something deeper than profit. He spent countless hours in video conferences with potential partners, sharing not just blueprints and budgets, but the philosophy that had transformed his own life. "The facilities are important," he would explain, "but what matters most is the spirit of the place." He always had Midnight Emperor's photo prominently displayed during these meetings, using their story to illustrate the power of compassion and second chances. Tommy's role evolved as well. Though still primarily based at Oakwood, he began traveling to help establish new programs, always with Midnight Emperor at his side. The stallion seemed to understand his role as an ambassador of hope, maintaining his gentle demeanor whether meeting nervous horses or uncertain humans. "Watch how he approaches them," Tommy would instruct new staff members, as Midnight Emperor demonstrated the patient trust-building that had become their hallmark. "He remembers what it's like to be frightened and in pain. That's why he can show others the way to healing." Sarah Carter observed these developments with mixed emotions. Pride in her grandson's accomplishments warred with concern about the growing demands on his time. But Tommy seemed to thrive on the challenges, his natural gift for healing growing stronger with each new experience. One particularly meaningful project came in the form of a partnership with veterans' rehabilitation programs. The connection between injured soldiers and rescued horses proved powerful, each understanding something about trauma and recovery that words alone couldn't express. During one session, a veteran who hadn't spoken since returning from combat found his voice while working with Midnight Emperor. The horse had stood quietly beside him for nearly an hour before the man finally broke down, burying his face in the stallion's mane. When he lifted his head, he began to talk, sharing the burden he'd carried alone for so long. Dr. Rodriguez documented these successes, building a compelling case for the effectiveness of their methods. Her research caught the attention of major universities, leading to partnerships that would help spread their approach even further. "We're not just treating symptoms," she explained to a group of visiting professors. "We're healing souls." The youth program continued to grow with remarkable results. Troubled teenagers who had rejected traditional therapy found something different in the quiet presence of the horses. Many returned as volunteers, their own healing inspiring them to help others facing similar struggles. James, the head groom who had once participated in Midnight Emperor's abandonment, became one of their most passionate advocates. His testimony about transformation carried special weight, showing that change was possible even after serious mistakes. "If I could go from that night to this," he would say, "anyone can choose a better path." Sterling's own transformation remained perhaps their most powerful example. The business world watched in amazement as the once ruthless tycoon redirected his considerable resources and skills toward healing and hope. Reporters frequently asked what had changed him so completely. "I had to lose everything I thought mattered," he would reply, "to find what really does." His gaze would invariably turn to Midnight Emperor during these interviews, the bond between them evident to all who witnessed it. The Foundation's work began attracting international attention. Requests for partnerships came from around the globe, each seeking to replicate the miracle that had begun on a snowy morning at the Miller barn. Sterling and Tommy found themselves hosting delegations from various countries, sharing their vision for healing that transcended boundaries and cultures. One afternoon, watching a group of children working with rescued horses, Sterling reflected on the magnitude of change a single act of compassion had sparked. "I used to think power came from control," he told Tommy. "Now I understand it comes from letting go, from choosing to trust, to forgive, to believe in second chances." Tommy nodded, understanding deep in his young eyes. That's what Midnight Emperor taught us both. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in holding on, but in letting go of who we thought we had to be. As the Foundation's influence grew, they never lost sight of their core mission. Each new facility maintained the personal touch that had made Oakwood special, ensuring that every horse and human who came through their doors received the individual attention they needed to heal. The documentary continued to touch lives, screened at film festivals and educational institutions worldwide. But more powerful than the film itself were the ongoing stories of transformation it inspired, stories of healing, hope, and the endless possibilities that open up when compassion guides the way. Through it all, Midnight Emperor remained the heart of their mission, his own journey from darkness to light, lighting the way for others. The horse that had once been deemed worthless had become a priceless symbol of the power of second chances, his story continuing to inspire new beginnings for both horses and humans in need of healing. 5 years later, the sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Estate's expanded grounds, where dozens of horses now grazed peacefully in the rehabilitation paddocks. The once formal gardens had been transformed into therapeutic spaces, with winding paths connecting various treatment areas. At the center of it all stood the original barn, preserved as a reminder of where their journey began. Midnight Emperor, now showing touches of grey around his muzzle, but still carrying himself with noble dignity, stood at his favorite spot overlooking the valley. Beside him, Tommy, now a young man of 21, sat on the fence reflecting on how far they'd come. The Midnight Emperor Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with 15 rehabilitation centers operating across 3 countries. "Remember that first morning in the Miller barn?" Sterling asked, joining them at the fence. The years had softened his appearance, laughter lines now outnumbering the worry creases that had once dominated his face. Who could have imagined where that moment would lead us? The Foundation had become a model for equine therapy and rehabilitation worldwide. Universities sent their veterinary students for specialized training, while medical professionals studied their approach to integrated healing. The documentary had won several awards and continued to inspire new initiatives focused on second chances. Sarah Carter, now in her 70s, but still sharp as ever, maintained her role as the heart of the original center. She'd become known as Gran to everyone at Oakwood, her wisdom and compassion touching countless lives. "Every rescue still reminds me of that first one," she often said, watching new horses arrive for rehabilitation. Dr. Rodriguez had established a research institute dedicated to studying the connection between animal and human healing. Her work, built on the foundation of what they'd learned with Midnight Emperor, was revolutionizing both veterinary medicine and psychological therapy. "We've helped over 1,000 horses," Tommy noted, reviewing their records. "But it's the human lives touch that are harder to count." He thought of the veterans who'd found peace, the troubled youth who'd discovered purpose, the wealthy horse owners who'd learned to value more than just winning. Sterling nodded, reaching out to pat Midnight Emperor's neck. "Each one a miracle, just like this fellow here." The horse nickered softly, still responding to Sterling's touch with the forgiveness that had changed everything. But you know what amazes me most? How the healing keeps spreading, touching lives we'll never even know about. They had stories from around the world now, stories of people inspired by Midnight Emperor's journey to start their own rescue operations, to choose compassion over convenience, to believe in the power of second chances. The Foundation's principles had been adapted for various settings, from inner-city youth programs to corporate leadership training. James had become a sought-after speaker, sharing his perspective on transformation and redemption. His journey, from participation in cruelty to dedication to healing, resonated deeply with those struggling with their own past mistakes. Change is always possible, he would tell them, if you're brave enough to choose it. The estate itself had evolved into a living testament to their mission. Visitors often remarked on the peaceful energy that seemed to permeate the grounds. Even the most traumatized horses responded to it, as if sensing they'd found a place where healing was possible. "We're ready for the next chapter," Sterling announced, sharing his latest vision. "A training academy, right here at Oakwood. A place where people can come to learn not just about horse rehabilitation, but about the kind of transformation that changes lives." Tommy's face lit up with enthusiasm. He'd been developing new therapeutic approaches, combining what he'd learned from Midnight Emperor with insights gained from their years of experience. "We could share everything we've learned, not just the technical skills, but the heart of what makes this work." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Midnight Emperor lifted his head, his eyes bright with the same intelligence and gentleness that had helped heal so many. He was more than just a success story now. He was a teacher, a healer, a living bridge between past and future. The afternoon light painted the scene in golden hues as they discussed their plans. The rehabilitation paddocks were full of horses at various stages of recovery, each with their own story of transformation. Staff members moved among them with the quiet confidence that came from understanding the deeper purpose of their work. "You know," Sterling reflected, watching a group of children helping with afternoon feeding, "success used to mean something very different to me. Now I measure it in moments like these, in lives touched, in hope restored, in second chances, given and received." Tommy smiled, understanding completely. Their work had grown far beyond saving one horse on a snowy morning. It had become a movement, a ripple effect of compassion that continued to spread in ways they could never have imagined. And at the heart of it all stood Midnight Emperor, the horse who had taught them that sometimes the greatest acts of healing come wrapped in unexpected packages. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.